Everyone ignored the poor black girl's signs until the billionaire read her lips. 12-year-old Amara Wells didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat perfectly still in the corner booth of a Memphis diner and mouthed the same 2 words over and over again, the way a person repeats a prayer they've almost stopped believing in. The man across the room shouldn't have noticed. He had a flight to catch, a deal to close, and 17 unread messages on his phone. He had been telling himself all morning that Memphis was just a stop, one night, one meeting, one signature, and then back to New York where everything made sense. But something made him look up from his coffee. And Caldwell Rhys, a man who had spent 30 years reading rooms that other men misread, read her lips. "Help me." 2 words. Over and over. Like a prayer she had stopped expecting to be answered. He didn't look away. He wouldn't find out until later why he couldn't. 3 hours earlier, the morning had started the way most mornings did in the Bingham Park neighborhood of Memphis. Slow. Gray. Ordinary in the way that hides everything underneath it. Amara had been awake since 5. Not because of school, it was Saturday. Not because of noise, the apartment was quieter than usual. She was awake because the silence felt wrong. Her mother, Amara Wells, always had the radio on by 5:30. Gospel first, then the local news. It was as reliable as sunrise. Some mornings Amara would lie in bed and listen to the muffled sound of it through the wall, her mother's voice sometimes joining in on the words she knew, low and soft, not performing, just present, and the sound of it was the first proof every morning that the world was still intact. But this morning, no radio. Amara had padded out of her bedroom in socked feet and stood in the narrow hallway for a long moment, listening. The kitchen faucet dripped. A car alarm sounded somewhere 2 blocks over. But no radio. No smell of coffee. No sound of her mother moving around the kitchen the way she always did, humming something under her breath even when she was tired. Renata's bedroom door was open. The bed was made. Not slept in. Made. The kind of tight, careful corners her mother only bothered with when she was trying to look presentable for someone, or when she was afraid and needed to feel like she had left things in order. Like she was saying, whatever happens, we were not people who lived in a mess. Amara stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then she went to the kitchen table and found the note. "Baby. Go to Mrs. Patton's if I'm not back by 9. Don't open the door for anyone else. I love you more than anything. Mama." Amara read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the front pocket of her purple hoodie, the one with the fraying cuffs her mother kept meaning to fix. She did not go to Mrs. Patton's. Mrs. Patton was 74 and hard of hearing and told everything she knew to anyone who asked. Her mother knew that. Her mother had still sent her there, which meant her mother wanted her somewhere nobody looking would think to search. Amara pulled up her hood and went out. Amara Wells worked 2 jobs. Days at the front desk of the Cartwright Motor Lodge off Elvis Presley Boulevard, and 3 evenings a week cleaning offices in the Harlow Financial Building downtown. She had worked both jobs since Amara was 4 years old. In all that time, she had never once left without saying goodbye. Amara knew both buildings the way children know their mother's routines. She knew which bus to take. She knew the security guard at the Harlow building was named Terrence and that he kept butterscotch candies in his left breast pocket and that he had a daughter named Kezia who played violin at Whitehaven High. She went to the motor lodge first. The woman behind the desk said Renata hadn't come in and wasn't she supposed to be off today. Amara thanked her and left. She went to the Harlow building next. Terrence was at his post. He smiled when he saw her, reached into his pocket, then caught something in her face that made the smile slow. "She was here last night," he said carefully. "Left around 9:30. She had a folder with her, thick one, elastic band around it. Did she say anything to you?" He glanced around the lobby. Then he leaned forward. "She asked me to remember something if anybody came asking." He lowered his voice. "The 4th floor. She said it had been locked off since Tuesday. Cleaning crew was told to skip it." A pause. She was told to skip it too. But she didn't, Amara said. No. What did she find? Terence shook his head slowly. She didn't say. Just asked me to remember. Amara thanked him. She unwrapped the candy he gave her. She walked back out into the grey morning and looked up at the Harlow building. Fourth-floor windows, dark. Every other floor had lights. Just that one, dark. Don't open the door for anyone else. The way someone says it when the else is specific. Amara put the candy in her pocket and started walking towards South Main. The Blue Bell diner smelled like bacon grease and dish soap and the sweetness of the pie case near the window. Amara had been here with her mother after church more times than she could count. Glenda behind the counter always gave her extra syrup. The corner booth in the back caught the morning light even when the sky was grey. She ordered hot chocolate, cheapest warm thing on the menu, and took the corner booth and opened her notebook. She wrote down everything Terence had told her. Fourth floor. Locked since Tuesday. Crew told to skip. Mama went anyway. Big folder. She stared at what she had written. Then she turned to a new page. Why would they lock the fourth floor? Another page. Who told them to? She was on the third page when the bell above the diner door rang and a man walked in wearing a coat that cost more than her mother's car. Caldwell Rhys was 51 years old and had not eaten at a diner in probably a decade. But his car service had gotten the pickup address wrong, his flight back to New York had been pushed 90 minutes, and his driver was stuck on I-40. His assistant found the Blue Bell on a map and said it was 3 blocks away and had Wi-Fi. He sat at the table nearest the door, ordered coffee, opened his laptop, and pulled up the Harlow financial file. He had been circling this acquisition for 8 months. Harlow was a mid-sized investment firm holding a portfolio of Memphis area land, including a commercial corridor south of the city that Caldwell's development team had flagged as one of the most undervalued positions in the entire Mid-South region. The acquisition was almost done. One item remained, the discrepancy in the land title documentation. His legal team called it a recording issue. Something administrative. Caldwell had not built 30 years in real estate development by treating recording discrepancies as administrative. He scrolled. He drank his coffee. He did not look up for a while. When he did, it was because something in his peripheral vision registered not as movement but as its absence. The little girl in the corner booth hadn't moved in 20 minutes. He noticed her the way you notice furniture at first. Small child in a purple hoodie, hot chocolate, spiral notebook. Nothing unusual. But she hadn't touched her drink. She wasn't on a phone. She was writing with the urgent focus of someone working through a problem that actually mattered, not doing homework, not killing time. And she was alone in the particular way that was different from simply being without a parent nearby. "We really should get going," the woman said, the warmth flooding back into her voice like a tide. "Amara, sweetheart, let's get your things." She reached across the table and placed her hand firmly over Amara's wrist, not a mother's touch, something deliberate and practiced, the grip of someone who had been told to collect a specific thing and was now collecting it. Amara went completely still. Caldwell's voice came out quiet and absolutely level. "Take your hand off her." The woman released her grip slowly. Not because she was afraid. Because she was recalculating. The man who had been standing in the aisle stepped half a pace closer. His size was a statement, not a threat exactly, more like a wall reminding you which direction you'd come from. Caldwell looked at him the way he looked at bad contract clauses. You can sit down or you can leave. Standing there is a choice you're going to have to explain later. The man looked at the woman. She gave a small nod. "He Saturday." Caldwell took out his phone. "Marcus. Run a name for me." Woman, late 30s, going by, he looked at her calmly. She said nothing. The man with her, Caldwell continued. Heavy build, late 40s, Harlow financial visitor badge, flipped face in. He ended the call. The woman folded her hands on the table. Her voice dropped, still pleasant on the surface, but with something cold running under it now. Whatever you think is happening here, I'd strongly encourage you to consider what position you are putting yourself in. This child's mother asked us to bring her somewhere safe. That is all this is. Where? Amara said. The woman looked at her. Where is somewhere safe? Amara asked. What's the address? A short silence. Your mother will explain when we get there. What's my mother's middle name? Nothing. What's our apartment number? Still nothing. What do I call her at home? Amara's voice remained small and steady and precise. She doesn't let me say Mom in public. She says it makes her feel old. So what do I call her? The diner had gone quiet around them. Glenda had stopped moving behind the counter. A man 2 tables over had lowered his newspaper. The woman's expression did not break. It simply stopped working, the way a machine stops when the power cuts, everything still in place, but nothing moving. Your mother, she said carefully, is very worried about you. She just wants you somewhere safe while she handles a situation. Amara looked at Caldwell. She tore a small piece from the corner of her notebook page and slid it across the table under 2 fingers. He lowered his hand and read it without picking it up. She grabbed my wrist before she let go. That means she has instructions. Someone sent her. He looked at Amara. He nodded once. Marcus called back in 4 minutes. The woman is Petra Okafor. Works for a Nashville consulting firm called Meridian Group. They do contract work for investment companies. A pause. The man is Gregory Haas. His visitor badge was a guest pass approved by a Harlow board member. Sylvester Crane. Caldwell kept his face still. Sylvester Crane sat on the Harlow board. He had been present at every acquisition meeting for 6 weeks, agreeable, cooperative, always the one who smoothed over disagreements. Always in the room. Always knowing exactly where things stood. What else? Caldwell said. Crane and a man named Foster Bolt have a history going back almost 20 years. Co-investors in multiple land deals. Both deals involved properties that transferred to shell entities before the transactions closed. Marcus hesitated. And Caldwell, the corridor. The one your team flagged. What about it? 6 of the parcels in that corridor changed hands through the same shell structure. Starting in 2004. The original owners, most of them were residential. Families. The land transfers were all through tax proceedings. A pause. Predominantly black neighborhoods. South Memphis, Whitehaven, Orange Mound. Caldwell went very still. He thought about the recording discrepancy in the Harlow title documents. The one his legal team called administrative. He thought about why he had come to Memphis in the first place. Why this deal? Why this corridor? Marcus, he said quietly. Pull the 2006 tax proceeding records for Orange Mound. Specifically, a property on Del Mar Avenue. A long pause on the line. Caldwell. Why Del Mar Avenue? Because that's the street my ex-wife grew up on, he said. Because that's the street her mother lost her house on, in 2006, through a tax lien she said she never received notice about. His voice remained even. Because Elise spent the last 3 summers of her life on that street visiting her grandmother, and I never once asked why the grandmother had to move. The conference room was very quiet. Run it, Caldwell said. They went to the Harlow building in Caldwell's car. Amara sat in the back seat with her notebook in her lap. Petra Okafor and Gregory Haas followed in a separate vehicle, not invited, not asked to stay away, simply following because that was now the only move they had left. Amara watched the city move past the windows. The familiar blocks of Bingham Park giving way to the wider streets downtown. You had a daughter, she said. Not a question. He glanced at her. You said had when you were talking to the man on the phone, she said. Most people say have. Even when they're scared. He was quiet for a moment. Elise, he said. She died when she was 9. An accident. He looked at the road. I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been. Amara wrote something in her notebook. Then she said, "That's why you didn't walk past." He didn't answer. She didn't need him to. At the Harlow building, Terence was at his desk. He looked at Amara with visible relief, then at Caldwell with something more careful. She said if her daughter ever came back with someone, I should check whether the someone let her lead the way in, he said. Caldwell stepped back. Amara walked in first. The basement lockers ran along the grey concrete wall, staff lockers, maintenance, a few contractor names on masking tape. Locker 7 was third from the left. Amara stood in front of it and reached into the front pocket of her hoodie for the folded piece of paper. 8 months ago her mother had pressed it into her hand and said, "There are things you hope you never need. You keep them anyway." She had seemed calm. That was the frightening part. It was not a warning from someone panicking. It was a warning from someone who had thought it all the way through. Amara unfolded the paper. Turned the dial. The locker opened. Inside, a sealed manila envelope with red tape. A USB drive taped to the door. And a photograph, loose, face down. She turned it over. The conference room on the 4th floor. She recognized the window pattern from the street. For men around the table. The shot taken through a partial crack in the door, slightly blurred at the edges, taken by someone who was not supposed to be there. One man at the table was signing a document, turned enough toward the door that his face was caught clearly. Amara looked at the photograph for a long moment. She turned it over. Her mother's handwriting. Careful, slanted, unhurried, the handwriting of a woman who had made a decision and was clear about it. They have been stealing land from poor families for 20 years. Rezoning. Shell companies. Falsified tax notices. 6 neighborhoods. Hundreds of families lost their homes. I saw it because I clean their floors. Nobody looks at the woman who cleans the floors. She read it twice. Then she held the photograph out to Caldwell. He took it. He looked at the 4 men around the table. He went very still, the specific stillness Amara had already learned meant he was not stopping but accelerating inside. He turned the photograph over. He read what her mother had written. He read it again. Then he said, quietly, "Amara, what street did you grow up on?" She blinked. "Bingham Avenue. But we moved. Before that it was Delmar, in Orange Mound. When I was little. My grandma's house." He looked at her. "Your grandmother's name," he said. "Celestine Wells." Amara watched his face carefully. "Why?" Caldwell set the photograph down on top of the envelope. He sat back against the concrete wall and looked at the ceiling. "Because my ex-wife's mother lived on Delmar Avenue in Orange Mound," he said. "Because she lost her house through a tax lien in 2006 that she said she never received notice about." He paused. "Because my daughter spent her last 3 summers in that neighborhood visiting her grandmother. And I never once thought to ask why the grandmother had to leave." The basement was very quiet. Amara stared at him. "Celestine Wells," he said again. "Your grandmother." "She died when I was 5, Amara said slowly. "My mom said she lost the house right before. Said something went wrong with the paperwork and she lost everything." A pause. "My mom never talked about it much. Said it made her too angry." Caldwell closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and picked up the photograph again and looked at the 4 men around the table. His voice, when it came, was very quiet and very certain. "Your mother cleaned their floors for years," he said. "And she didn't know she was cleaning the floors of the men who took her mother's house." Amara sat down slowly on the cold concrete floor, her back against the lockers. She said nothing for a long time. Then, she found out on Tuesday. Yes. That's why she went to the 4th floor. Yes. That's why she made the bed. Caldwell looked at her. The little girl sitting on the basement floor with her notebook and her purple hoodie and the fraying cuffs and the folded combination to a locker that had waited 8 months to be opened. Yes, he said. The basement hummed around them. Pipes. Ventilation. The ordinary sounds of a building that had no idea what was sitting at its foundation. Amara opened her notebook. She turned to a new page. She picked up her pen. Okay, she said. And she started writing. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later with 2 members of Caldwell's legal team and a data specialist. The USB drive opened to a folder of scanned documents, financial records, amended survey filings, internal memos. Renata had photographed them over months, carefully, 1 page at a time. Every evening the 4th floor was accidentally accessible. Each document was dated in her handwriting. Each one cross-referenced to the next. Nobody looks at the woman who cleans the floors. Caldwell set the photograph down on top of the envelope. He sat back against the concrete wall and looked at the ceiling. Because my ex-wife's mother lived on Delmar Avenue in Orange Mound, he said. Because she lost her house through a tax lien in 2006 that she said she never received notice about. He paused. Because my daughter spent her last 3 summers in that neighborhood visiting her grandmother. And I never once thought to ask why the grandmother had to leave. The basement was very quiet. Amara stared at him. Celestine Wells, he said again. Your grandmother. She died when I was 5, Amara said slowly. My mom said she lost the house right before. Said something went wrong with the paperwork and she lost everything. A pause. My mom never talked about it much. Said it made her too angry. Caldwell closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and picked up the photograph again and looked at the 4 men around the table. His voice, when it came, was very quiet and very certain. Your mother cleaned their floors for years, he said. And she didn't know she was cleaning the floors of the men who took her mother's house. Amara sat down slowly on the cold concrete floor, her back against the lockers. She said nothing for a long time. Then, she found out on Tuesday. Yes. That's why she went to the 4th floor. Yes. That's why she made the bed. Caldwell looked at her. The little girl sitting on the basement floor with her notebook and her purple hoodie and the fraying cuffs and the folded combination to a locker that had waited 8 months to be opened. Yes, he said. The basement hummed around them. Pipes. Ventilation. The ordinary sounds of a building that had no idea what was sitting at its foundation. Amara opened her notebook. She turned to a new page. She picked up her pen. Okay, she said. And she started writing. Marcus arrived 30 minutes later with 2 members of Caldwell's legal team and a data specialist. The USB drive opened to a folder of scanned documents, financial records, amended survey filings, internal memos. Renata had photographed them over months, carefully, 1 page at a time. Every evening the 4th floor was accidentally accessible. Each document was dated in her handwriting. Each one cross-referenced to the next. Nobody looks at the woman who cleans the floors. They looked now. What they found was not complicated. It was, in fact, very simple, which was part of why it had worked for 2 decades. 6 Memphis area neighborhoods, all lower income, most of them predominantly black, had been targeted in a coordinated pattern. Properties were rezoned under false pretenses. Tax notices were sent to slightly wrong addresses so residents never received them. Families lost their homes through proceedings they never knew were coming. The land transferred to holding companies. The holding companies transferred to other entities. By the time the corridor south of the city was ready for commercial development, the corridor Caldwell's team had identified as enormously undervalued. Every parcel was owned by entities that connected, through 7 layers of paperwork, to one name. Foster Bolt. And sitting inside the folder, near the bottom, was a single scan page that had not been there by accident. Renata had photographed it separately and placed it last, like a period at the end of a sentence. It was the original 2006 tax lien filing for a property on Del Mar Avenue in Orange Mound. The property owner of record, Celestine Odessa Wells. The notice address listed 2 digits transposed. A house number that had never existed. A notice that was never going to arrive. One of Caldwell's attorneys said, quietly, "This goes back 20 years. Caldwell looked at the scan page. At Celestine Wells's name. At the address that had been wrong by exactly 2 digits, carefully, deliberately, bureaucratically wrong. It goes back further than that, he said. It goes back to the moment someone decided that certain people's paperwork didn't need to be accurate. Because nobody was going to check. He put the page down. Because nobody looks at the woman who cleans the floors. And nobody looks at the notice mailed to an address that doesn't exist. Because why would they? Who would notice? He looked at Amara, sitting in the chair against the wall with her notebook. Her granddaughter, he said. 12 years later. In a diner on a Saturday morning. He called Adrienne Finch. Former federal prosecutor, 15 years in the Justice Department before going private. She had told him once, at the end of a long dinner, that there was exactly one category of case that could make her pick up the phone at any hour. A paper trail with a 20-year pattern, she had said. Give me documents and I will give you a reckoning. She picked up on the second ring. He gave her the short version. By the time he finished she was already moving, FBI field office contacts, a colleague who had spent his career on long-run land fraud, a forensic accounting firm that specialized in shell entity tracing. How did you find this? She asked. A cleaning woman kept records, he said. And her daughter kept a notebook. A pause. Get me everything digitized and transmitted in 2 hours, Adrienne said. And keep that child somewhere I know is safe. While the legal team worked, Amara sat in the conference room corner and watched everything with the quiet attention of someone who had been watching things all her life and had learned that watching carefully was the only power she reliably had. At some point Caldwell sat across from her. You're not scared, he said. I'm scared, she said. I'm just doing things while I'm scared. She turned to a new page. My mom says fear is just information. She says the only bad thing about fear is when people use it to stop you instead of to tell you where to be careful. He nodded slowly. She says the hardest part of being poor, Amara continued, isn't not having enough money. It's that people look at you and decide already what you can and can't know. What you did and didn't see. She wrote as she spoke. They looked at my mom for 8 years and decided she was just the woman who cleaned their floors. They weren't careful around her. She paused. They made the same mistake with you, Caldwell said. Everyone did. She set down the pen. The teacher who didn't file the report. The neighbor who called it family business. Every single person on that 4th floor who never once thought the woman emptying the recycling bin was reading what was inside it. She looked at him steadily. Nobody ignored my mother's signs because they were hard to see. They ignored them because they decided she wasn't worth reading. The room was quiet. What's the first thing you're going to say to her? Caldwell asked. When she gets here. Amara thought about it seriously. I'm going to tell her she should have woken me up, she said. Before she left. She should have woken me up and told me. She was trying to protect you. I know. A pause. I'm going to tell her I know. And then I'm going to tell her she should have woken me up anyway. Caldwell almost smiled. You're going to be all right. Amara looked at him. I know that already. She picked up her pen. I want her to be all right too. Renata Wells was found at 2:47 in the afternoon. Not harmed. Hidden. She had crossed the state line into Mississippi the night before and checked into a small motel in South Haven under the maiden name of a childhood friend, an old kindness she had carried for years without knowing she would need it. She had been there since 10 o'clock Friday night with a burner phone bought at a gas station off the highway, waiting to see whether Locker 7 would be found. She had called no one. She did not know who was safe to call. She had sat with the deadbolt thrown and the chain on, thinking about her daughter. When Caldwell's assistant reached her, she was on her feet before the call was finished. "Is Amara safe?" Her voice was hoarse. She had been very quiet for a very long time. She was told yes. She was told more than yes. She was told enough. She was in a car heading back to Memphis within 15 minutes, still in yesterday's work clothes, hands clasped in her lap, eyes on the road, frightened still, but now frightened in the direction of forward instead of backward. Adrienne Finch had asked everyone to stay at the Harlow building until the field office contact arrived. So they waited. The legal team worked. Marcus moved between rooms. Caldwell sat near the window and watched the city. Amara sat by the door. She heard the elevator before anyone else in the room registered the sound. She was on her feet. She was through the conference room door and down the hallway before Caldwell could stand. He didn't follow immediately. He gave them a minute. Then he walked out into the hallway and found them there, Renata on her knees on the industrial carpet in yesterday's work clothes, her arms around her daughter, rocking slightly. The specific kind of holding that comes after a fear you cannot name out loud. One hand pressed to the back of Amara's head. Not crying loudly. Just present. Just there. The way you hold something when you thought you might not get to hold it again. Amara had her arms around her mother's neck. Both of them were very quiet. Caldwell stood in the hallway and looked at the ceiling. He thought about a cleaning woman who had spent 8 years walking into a building and doing the invisible work that kept it running, and who had looked at a piece of paper one Tuesday evening and recognized, suddenly and completely, the shape of something that had been done to her mother. Who had not run immediately. Who had gone back, page by page, and built a record. Who had then gone home and made her bed and written a note to her daughter and disappeared before whoever was looking for her caught up. He thought about Celestine Wells. An address 2 digits wrong. A notice that never arrived. A house on Delmar Avenue that became a parcel in a holding company that became part of a corridor that a billionaire had almost signed his name to without knowing what it had cost. He thought about Elise. 9 years old. A morning he had not looked up from. He had looked up today. He was not entirely sure he deserved credit for that. It was 30 years of training himself to notice the thing that registered as wrong, and one morning when the thing that registered as wrong was not a contract clause but a child mouthing 2 words to a table in a diner, 2 words she had almost stopped believing could reach anyone. Renata looked up from her daughter's hair and found his eyes across the hallway. He didn't say anything. She said, "Thank you." He nodded once. Turned back toward the conference room. That was enough. The acquisition of Harlow Financial was suspended that same afternoon. Sylvester Crane resigned from the board 4 days later, before the formal inquiry went public. His resignation letter was 2 sentences long. Foster Bolt's name appeared in federal filings 11 days after that. The investigation that followed took 2 years to complete and resulted in the largest land fraud prosecution in Shelby County history. The paper trail required almost no interpretation. Renata Wells had been meticulous, every document dated, every page cross-referenced in her own handwriting, every connection named plainly. Nobody looks at the woman who cleans the floors. They looked now. The shell company's claim to the corridor land was voided entirely. A civil case brought on behalf of the 6 affected neighborhoods moved slowly. Justice in paperwork form always does, but it moved. Families who had lost properties through falsified tax proceedings became eligible for compensation claims. The process was imperfect and incomplete in the way that legal remedies for 20-year wrongs tend to be. But it happened. Petra Okafor cooperated fully with investigators. Gregory Haas said almost nothing, which turned out to be enough. Renata Wells received a formal settlement reviewed line by Adrienne Finch. It did not make her wealthy. It made her free. Free from the second job. Free from the motor lodge. Free to wake up in the morning without adding numbers that never added up. She and Amara moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in East Memphis on a street with a good school 2 blocks away. The apartment had windows on both sides. In the mornings, the light came through from the east and turned everything warm before the day started. Renata always had the radio on by 5:30. Gospel first, then the news. Amara started 7th grade that fall. Her teacher noticed her on the first day and wrote in her notes that evening, Amara Wells listens like she's keeping records. Watch this one. She was right. Caldwell Rhys never spoke publicly about what had happened. The story that mattered was not the one about him. He restructured the acquisition entirely, new board, clean title review, no Foster Bolt, no Sylvester Crane, no recording discrepancies that anyone called administrative. He donated an amount to the Housing Coalition's legal fund that the organization's director described as unexpectedly specific and entirely without conditions. The amount covered the legal costs for all 6 neighborhood cases exactly. He did not announce it. He did one other thing. On Amara's 13th birthday, a package arrived at the Wells apartment. Inside was a leather notebook, the kind that ages well instead of falling apart, and a card in plain handwriting. Keep writing things down. Amara read it twice. She put it in the front pocket of her purple hoodie. Her mother had finally fixed the cuffs, neat stitching, doubled thread, the kind of repair that holds. She opened the notebook to the first page. She thought about a grey Saturday morning. A diner on South Main. The silence of an apartment where the radio should have been on. A made bed and a folded note. A locker combination written in her mother's hand 8 months before it was needed. She thought about a grandmother named Celestine who had lost a house on Delmar Avenue because 2 digits were transposed in an address, and a mother who had cleaned the floors of the men responsible for 20 years without knowing it, and who had found out one Tuesday evening and had not run. Not immediately. She had gone back for evidence first. At the top of the first page, Amara wrote the question she had written in the old spiral notebook on the morning the city had walked past her and one man had not. Why would they lock the 4th floor? She turned to the second page. Below the question, in smaller letters, she wrote the answer her mother had already given her, the answer that had been true for 20 years before anyone with power was willing to read it. Because the floors know everything. And nobody watches the woman who cleans them. She kept writing. Because some signs aren't meant to be read by everyone. They're meant for the one person brave enough to stop. Even, especially, when stopping is 20 years too late.